Welcome to Torah Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton.
I'm Robin.
And we're here to discuss Parsha Tetzaveh, which is found in Exodus, beginning in chapter 27, verse 20, and going through chapter 30, verse 10. And this is a continuation, of course, of the discussion of the tabernacle. This is the second of three portions in a row that discuss the tabernacle.
The most important subject ever.
Absolutely.
Right? And
Amazing
the more I think
subject.
about it, the more important it becomes in my mind. You know, Grant, we have often ordered pieces of furniture, some from this company called IKEA, and when it arrives and we open the box and the packets, there are all these little pieces, parts, and nuts and bolts. And you know me, I often get so overwhelmed by all the little nuts and bolts. I just throw up my hands and walk away. And then you and Lindsay proceed to put this amazing thing together. But I have persevered at times and opened those little packets. And I'm always tempted to think, these don't do anything. Those don't matter. But
They matter.
They matter. Well, as we start to read this portion, it gets into the nuts and bolts of how Hashem wants his people to come before him. And he was saying something so important about himself to Moses for him to share with the people of Israel. And there's lots of pieces, parts here.
Yes.
They all matter.
But we can think, well, this only applies to Aaron and the priest. I'm not a Levitical priest. It doesn't matter to me. But we are to be a kingdom of priests.
It's relevant.
Yeah, and we have to understand what the word priest means. The word priest is kohen, but it's also a verb. And, you know, he says you're going to make these garments for them so that they can kohen for me. It has that 3 or 4 times in here.
And that was then, and this is now, and so what does it matter to me?
Do we want to serve God?
Yeah.
This is our pattern for serving him. Let me just read a verse real quick from 2 Samuel 8:18. And it's never translated literally, but I'm going to translate it literally. It says, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was over the Kerethites and the Pelethites. And David's sons were chief Kohanim, chief priests. Now, we know they weren't Levitical priests because they're from the tribe of Judah. But they're called Kohanim. Because what does the word Kohanim mean? It means servants. They were servants. So we can all be Kohanim, though we're not the ones who may operate in the temple or tabernacle. But these pictures are also for us. Now, none of us are chief priests, but we are all to be chief servants.
And it isn't for ourselves alone. The purpose of a servant is to serve others.
God. Yes.
This is how we connect with each other and him and the world around us. It's also important.
Exactly.
Well, the opening words of this portion brings about that very principle. It says, you are to bring pure olive oil beaten for the light to cause a lamp to burn continually. This is what the people were commanded to do. And it says, in the tent of meeting outside the curtain, which is before the testimony, it was to be set in order to burn from evening to morning before Adonai. It will be a statute throughout their generations. We mentioned last week when we were talking about the introduction of the tabernacle pattern that it was as if God was bringing about an entire new creation within the creation, a world within the world, to reintroduce himself.
Yes.
And if we think back to the original creation in Genesis, the opening words, the first thing that he brought about to penetrate the darkness was what?
Light.
Light. He said, let there be light. So when I read the opening words of this portion, I smiled to myself, and I'm thinking, there it is. Let there be light. And he allows us to cooperate with him in order to bring about this light. And it requires crushing.
Yes, it does.
It requires that the olives be crushed and that the oil be made, and he invites us and requires us to maintain that oil in a lamp, in a lampstand. And if we don't do it, what happens?
It will go out.
It'll go
over and over. And that is expected. You know, when it says it is a, excuse me, to kindle the lamp continually, it's not that the lamp burns continually, but it's kindled continually.
It's part of what we do.
Right. At the end of the Torah portion, we find out that the priest was to go in and kindle the menorah every afternoon. He cleans it in the morning, and then when the sun gets ready to go down, he goes and kindles it again. So it's not that the light burns 24/7, but it's that you kindle it every single day. And that's a lesson for us. We tend to think, oh, I'm letting my light shine. I'm done with that. I can ignore that now. God says, no, 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 no. You have to maintain your light every single day.
Because a vessel doesn't produce light for its own sake.
No. You have to keep fueling it up.
Right,
Yes.
right. You know, we sing that little song together as a community often, and it's
This little light of mine?
Not that one. The lamp is the mitzvah. The
yes.
light of the world is the Torah. That's
the
from
light is the
Proverbs
Torah.
6. Right. And so it's a relevant verse as we talk about this, because the lamp, the container, is a commandment.
And it doesn't give light.
It has the potential to, but
yes.
if it isn't filled with oil,
Right.
it's not going to produce light.
It's just the vessel.
It's the eternal teaching
Yes.
and word that
Right.
that source of light, because he is light.
Yes.
That fills that vessel, that gives it light.
It reminds me of many of the Hanukkah banquets we've had at Beth Tikkun, and people come in, they all bring their menorahs, and the menorahs are all different sizes, different materials. Some you can see were expensive. I've seen others were just handmade, and they're all different. They're all beautiful. But once the lights go out and it gets dark, you can't see the menorahs anymore.
Right.
And then when they kindle them, all you see the lights.
You don't notice
No.
the containers.
And a menorah may be beautiful and expensive, but in the dark, it doesn't make any difference.
Right.
It's the light. It's just a vessel for the light. And it's the light. And the lights look all the same. They're all beautiful. And so we can brag about all of our theology, our training, and how righteous we are and how much we've memorized of the Bible. That's all vessel. What's the light coming from your life? Because that's what matters when it gets dark.
So how do we maintain that, Grant? One of the verses that I love, it says in Proverbs 16, in the light of the king's countenance, there is life. So as we seek his countenance or his face or him alone, that's the source of our life
Yes.
and light.
And there's also a hint right at the very end of the Torah portion. If you go to chapter 30, and you go to verse 7, it says, upon it shall Aaron bring the spice incense up in smoke. Let's talk about the golden incense altar. Every morning, so he burns incense every morning when he cleans the lamps. He shall bring it up in smoke. We see the altar of incense and the menorah connected here. So he lights the incense in the morning,
Right.
and cleans the lamps of the menorah, because the menorah is not burning right now. It's not lit. Then verse 8, and when Aaron kindles the lamps in the afternoon, he shall bring it up and smoke continual incense before Adonai for your generations. So he lights the incense in the morning, he burns it in the morning, he burns it in the afternoon. And when he does these two activities, he also cleans the menorah in the morning and lights it in the afternoon. Now the incense altar represents prayer.
And just that connection
Yes.
with the divine.
Yeah.
And the realization that he's our source.
Yes. And so we see prayer in the morning, prayer in the afternoon connected with cleaning and with lighting, fueling up and lighting.
There's a maintenance
cleaning
required.
and light. I have to constantly be cleaning. I have to be repenting of the things that have accumulated in the day, getting my feet washed, getting pure before my Lord again. It's a daily activity, continual. And only then can I be a light again.
You know, there's a verse in Isaiah 42 that for years have just, encouraged my soul when I'm weary. And it says that a bruised reed he won't break, and a dimly burning wick he doesn't snuff out or extinguish. So when we're doing our part even when that light seems to be flickering and just barely there, even if we're weary, but we're leaning into him, he's not the one who's going to extinguish that flame. He doesn't do that.
If anything, he's gently blowing on it to kind of so
it,
burst into flame.
He says, just maintain and draw close to me, and I'm the one that is the source of that light. We don't create our own light.
That's right.
So it has to be remembered. And I also think of the parable in Matthew 25 with the 10 virgins and their lamps, and they're waiting for the bridegroom, and half of them have maintained their oil and filled it, and it's ready, and it's
They're the
burning.
wise ones.
They're the wise ones. But the other ones, and it was half of them, it was quite a big portion of those that call themselves part of the bride, right? They forgot.
They were foolish.
Or they procrastinated.
Yeah. And their menorahs, their lamps might have been beautiful and the most expensive.
Probably really shiny.
But empty. Who cares how beautiful it is if it's empty? Yeah.
So meaningful.
Yes.
Well, speaking of the candle and the light, or the container and the divine light, it also reminds me of the subject that we brought up last week. I think we might want to continue with, and that is the combination of the natural and the divine that we find within the tabernacle, because this portion emphasizes that even more.
Oh, yes.
There are materials of wood that represent this natural world that God says, I'm providing them for you. I want you to use your wisdom and to make them beautiful and to bring them in, and then I'm going to combine it with a divine element, and it's going to be perfect.
Yes. Yeah, you see a combination of wood and these metals. And as you go into the tabernacle itself, the metals become more expensive. It goes from copper on the outside, and then you start seeing silver and most of all gold.
Right.
And gold is something that's impervious to the elements. It stays beautiful, and it just, salt and acids and things just don't bother it. And gold is always a symbol of the divine. But when you see wood and gold, or wood and brass combined, that's kind of a picture of the blending of the two.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to go into there that I'm still figuring out. But it's...
Well, even the tabernacle, just quickly to mention, because I know we want to talk about the garments.
Yes.
That's a really big subject. The planks that made up the walls were individual planks of wood, and there's an old saying that I heard years ago, and it cracks me up, because it says every pot has to sit on its own bottom.
Yeah.
And what that means is each of us as individuals have to take responsibility for our own lives.
Yes.
And yes, we have a natural part of who we are, but we have to stand on our own 2 feet and go before him and allow him to give us meaning. And we can't do that for someone else, and no one else can do it for us. But years ago, Grant, you pointed out that each of these planks stood on end around the edges of this tabernacle, and that they were all connected by rings.
They had bands around the tops
So
and sockets on the bottom.
We're not only individual, but we're connected to other people who have to stand on their own 2 feet. And
that's
together,
exactly right.
We build something.
And it's a picture of what we talked about last week, where God says to make a tabernacle that I may dwell betocham, within you.
Within you.
Yeah. And this might be a good time to mention one of the items of the high priest clothing, and that's the breastplate, the choshen. And it's called the choshen mishpatim, which is translated as the breastplate of judgment, which sounds really gloomy. It sounds like it's the breastplate of condemnation.
Right.
No. It's a breastplate of mishpatim. And we looked at the commandments called mishpatim. We have a Torah portion called mishpatim. And these commandments are the commandments that have to do with personal relationships, how man relates with man, how Israelites relate with the other Israelites. And so on the breastplate, you see 12 different kinds of stones, precious stones. Each one has a name of a tribe engraved on it. They're set in gold filigree. It's a beautiful thing. And so you see all the tribes in proper and perfect relationship. And that is what we look like spiritually when we all obey the mishpatim, which tells us how to respect one another,
Right.
be responsible for one another, take responsibility for our own actions. We dwell together in peace.
And then there's a
like
beautiful
those,
pattern.
like the planks that are vertical, standing around.
amazing.
Yeah, and this is what God dwells in, a community that is at peace with itself, where people love one another, and God's presence is there.
Yeah, yeah. So getting back to the clothing that we just brought up, there's a lot of nuts and bolts detail describing
Yeah.
him. Let's talk about what's written on his forehead and why.
Well, before we do that, I want to back up to one thing. I find this fascinating. Let's take a kind of a big overview.
Okay.
In chapter 27, in last week's portion, we find the Ark of the Covenant described, and then the cover for the Ark, the table of showbread, the menorah, and then we see the covers of the walls and the veil of the building itself. Then we go on to the outer courtyard, the bronze altar, and then the curtains around the courtyard. So God's working from the inside out, describing all these items. And the oil from the menorah. Then, here in chapter 28, the priest's garments. And 29, the inauguration of the priest. And then in chapter 30, he then describes the incense altar and the laver. He goes right back to the furniture.
So it seems like
They're all integrated together.
right, but it seems like why are his clothing and his garments
I know.
such a big deal?
I was thinking about this earlier, and I was thinking about how people hire you to come and do interior decorating and home staging for them. And so you'll have all the paint colors, and you'll say, now these are the paintings we need, and you need this kind of rug, and we need to get this chair here and that lamp there. Now here are the clothes I want you to wear in your house.
That would be ridiculous.
That'd be a little ridiculous. But that's what God does. In the middle of the description of the building, he tells them what they have to wear in the building.
But as always, it's purposeful.
It's all purposeful.
So tell us the purpose.
Well, there are two things here. I mean, there are a lot of things, but there are two main things I want to bring out. With the priest had 8 garments. The high priest had 8 garments. Aaron's sons had 4 white linen garments they wore. Aaron, the high priest, and all high priests after him also wore those same 4 white linen garments, plus 4 what they call golden garments that had gold thread woven into them. And there was the head plate, there was the breastplate, the ephod, and the ma'il, the beautiful blue robe that had the red and purple and gold threads mixed in. So these beautiful, colorful garments.
Right.
He wore those in addition to the 4.
Right.
Now, when you look at the list of these in chapter 28, here at the beginning of the portion, in verse 4, it says, these are the garments that they shall make: a breastplate, an ephod, a robe, a tunic of box-like knit, a turban, and a sash. The sash is the belt. How many are there? There's 6.
So there's 2
There's 2 missing. There are 2 missing. It's like, where are the 2 missing ones? So you go through and you go through and you find all these details about the garments. And then finally, when you get near the end of the chapter, in verse 36, then it gives us the last 2. And we have to ask the question, why are these 2 left to the end? What do they have to do with each other? Verse 36, you shall make a head plate of pure gold, and shall engrave upon it, engraved like a signet ring, Kadosh LeAdonai, holy to Adonai. And it gives some more detail. And then you go down to verse 42 and get the last garment. And you shall make for them linen underwear.
So he even describes
to cover
their
the flesh
underwear.
of nakedness.
Isn't that something?
So why are the golden head plate and the underwear put together at the end?
And they're so
Opposite of each
opposite,
other.
yeah.
One you never see, and it's to cover the nakedness of his flesh.
And
It's
the
his
other
undergarment.
one is for everyone to see.
Yeah, the other one is the most obvious piece. I think there's a very, very important lesson here. And that is, we are to be holy to the Lord. We're to live lives that are set apart. We're to live lives of service to God by serving people. And our lives are to be different. But our private lives, represented by the underwear, they also have to be different. We can't just put on the golden head plate, but then have this hidden sin life that nobody sees. Both have to be in holiness.
And what does the word holy mean again? Because
set apart.
It
Simply set
doesn't mean
apart.
religious.
No. Set apart. There are a lot of religious people who are not holy. But it means to be set apart. And how many times have we seen what you might call religious celebrities who are out there, look at my head plate, I'm holy to the Lord, and then later we find out their private lives were horrible. And then there's this embarrassment and this shame, and everything that they did comes crumbling down. And nobody wants to talk about him anymore.
This principle that you're describing is even pictured as we look at the big picture of the tabernacle, because the things that were happening in the innermost chamber, the Holy of Holies, privately, with just the high priest, nobody else saw, at a glance could seem, well, that wasn't as important because everybody didn't see it. But in reality, Grant, it was the most important.
Yes.
So the things that happen in the deepest, most private chambers of our own spirit are the most important things.
Well, think about it. Imagine yourself as the high priest, and you're getting dressed to go to work in the tabernacle. What's the very first thing you put on? Your head plate?
No.
Your underwear. So which should come first in our lives? Our private lives must be in order, and they have to be holy to the Lord.
And we tell ourselves that doesn't matter.
Yeah. God works from the inside out, as he describes the tabernacle, and he works from the inside out as the high priest gets dressed for work.
But even the headpiece that says set apart or holy for the Lord, if we think about it, is going right back to the principle, because it's denoting his thoughts.
Yes.
And the frontal lobe of our minds and our brains is where we make choices that nobody can see until they work themselves out through our hands and feet, which they inevitably will.
Yeah.
But that is what it says.
It's what it says.
Yeah. And we try to fool ourselves and fool others, thinking that if we just wear those words on the outside of our life, it's enough, but it isn't.
No, it isn't. You know, this brings up something that I find fascinating. And it's this. The ark is, the Hebrew word for the ark is the word aron. Aleph Resh Vav Nun. But what's the high priest's name? Aharon. Aaron is Aharon. Aleph Hey Resh Vav Nun.
It has that.
Yeah, it's the same word as Aaron, but with one additional letter. And that's
breath.
the letter Hey.
Right.
Breath. Now, when you think about that, the letters of Aaron, of ark, are there in Aaron's name. But he's like a walking, living, talking ark. The Ark of the Covenant dwelt in the Holy of Holies, and here's Aaron also with the gold on his forehead. He is holy to the Lord. He's the only one who gets to go into the Holy of Holies and come out and intercede. And you start thinking about, this is what we're to be. You know, the ark always represents God's presence in the world. Wherever the ark goes, God's presence is there. And that's the way we're to be as well as priest. Now, we're not high priest. Only Yeshua is our high priest. But where we go, we should be taking God's presence with us.
And it doesn't mean in a preachy kind
No.
of, we're carrying around a message that we impose on people in an annoying way.
Yeah.
What it means is we clothe ourselves with what? The woman of valor dresses herself with strength and dignity. I have a little framed picture that a good friend gave me years ago on my desk, and the words, she dresses herself with strength and dignity, because clothing matters.
Yes, it does.
It's what the world sees when we leave our home and we walk out of our inner chamber. And if I don't dress myself with that, nothing I say or do is gonna affect encouragement to the world around me.
Well, you know, when you talk about the woman of valor being dressed in strength and dignity, we're also given two words here for the priest's clothing. In chapter 28, verse 2, it says, "You shall make vestments of sanctity, or holy garments, for Aaron your brother. for glory and splendor. Now, if you look at those two words, the word glory, kavod, is the word that also means weight. And that is the essence of what glory is. It's something that has real weight. When that it has gravitas is probably the word we would use. And splendor is the word tiferet, which is a word that means beauty, but a beauty that comes from perfect balance.
Right.
Perfect balance. So you need strength to bear weight. And dignity is beautiful. So the words that describe the woman of valor's clothing and the words that describe the high priest clothing, they go like hand in glove together.
And it doesn't mean that there aren't times that I have a spirit of heaviness, but the word also says that he gives me garments of praise for those.
Yes.
And
Isn't that
so
amazing?
even when I have a spirit of heaviness, I don't have to fake it.
No.
He covers me with an ability to remember that I can know that all is well. Even
That's
when
right.
it's night. She rises up while it's night, doesn't she?
She does.
And prepares food for her household. And she dresses her household with beautiful garments because she knows her source.
Yeah. Well, you know, you're talking about how being holy to the Lord doesn't mean we go out mouthing all these platitudes. I think of my mom. She was very, very quiet. But when she spoke, everybody leaned in to hear. And she was just a humble, beautiful woman of valor. And, you know, and in this description, we don't hear one thing about what the high priest is supposed to be saying.
And in the Woman of Valor, she doesn't talk
No.
either.
But we find out there was sound coming from the high priest. And it's described in chapter 28.
And it's part of his clothing.
He's part of his clothing. And it talks about his ephod. In verse 33, it says, "You shall make on its hem pomegranates of turquoise, purple, and scarlet wool on its hem all around, and gold bells between them all around."
Isn't that
a gold bell and a
fascinating?
pomegranate, a gold bell and a pomegranate
There's
on
that
the hem of the
balance
robe,
again.
all the way around. It must be on Aaron in order to minister. Its sound shall be heard when he enters the sanctuary before Adonai and when he leaves, so that he not die. In other words, when you come into my presence, he's saying you have to be clothed properly. So these bells and pomegranates, what do they represent? They represent the fruit of the Spirit.
And the gifts.
And pomegranates are
right?
full of seeds, right? And the gifts of the Spirit. And they're in balance.
Right.
And he doesn't wear them on his head.
It's down on the hem close to
He
the
doesn't
earth.
hold them like pom-poms and
Right,
shake them.
right.
It's when he walks, he's walking in these things. These are the things that are right down at the ground. And so it's not something he has to put effort into. It's a byproduct of his walk. When he walks, the bells jingle.
When
And
he's quiet, yeah. When
Yeah.
he's still.
so we don't need to go around ringing our bells. All we need to do is walk in the Spirit. And with these sounds are made. The bells and the gifts, the fruit are just going to be, they're going to follow us. They're just going to be a part of our lives.
And start with the innermost secret place where nobody's watching, because
Yeah.
that ultimately is what the world will see and hear the most.
I remember a few years ago I was invited to speak at a congregation down in Alabama, and it happened to be this portion. And I was talking about the bells and pomegranates, and I got this really wacky idea, and I included it. And have you ever seen a court jester? And I took a picture of a guy who was dressed up for Mardi Gras or something. He had all the face makeup, and he had one of these court jester hats on,
Those
and
ridiculous-
all the spikes and little bells.
Right.
And I thought, this is like what
A religious nut.
a religious nut looks like. His bells are on his
Because
head.
he's always shaking his head, making
Yeah.
noise. Yeah.
And it's like, everybody look at my bells. I'm ringing my bells. And
It's just goofy.
it's just goofy. You make a clown of yourself.
Right.
They should be down to the ground, down near the earth. And when we walk, they just do their thing.
And it matters. It's when
Yeah.
it matters and it serves people, because that was the point of the priest's service, and that is the point
Yes.
of our life, and that is the point of light. Light isn't for its own
That's right.
sake.
That's right.
There's quite a message being shared.
Oh, there are so many messages being shared here, and we've scratched the surface, but if nothing else, maybe we've opened people's eyes to realize there's a lot going on here, and then they can begin to dig on their own and
Right,
discover things.
Right. As we circle back to the beginning, when it mentions the pure olive oil, it mentions how it's beaten for light. And we would be remiss not to remember that the very light of the world who came as a servant of all and a priest
crushed.
and a king was certainly crushed and
Yes.
bruised. And the light of his life we're still benefiting from, and the world will benefit
Yes.
from for eternity.
That's right.
And it kind of explains why he had to suffer so much.
You know, I wasn't going to share this, but a long time ago I made up a children's story. I never really wrote it out. I just shared it with the congregation about, and the actors in the story were olives.
I remember this story.
And you know, I thought of these olives. They're all on this tree and it's sunny and they're just having a great time hanging out, literally.
Yeah.
And then come the guys to harvest. They start beating the branches with sticks, beating the tree, and they're catching the olives in sheets on the ground. The olives are falling off, and they're thinking, oh no, life is now upside down. There's chaos.
I don't want to go through that. I don't want to leave my
And there-
comfort zone.
And there's one or two up on the top saying, they didn't get me, they didn't get me, I'm safe. And they see their friends all being hauled off.
And they think they are
Yes.
the smart ones.
And they're hauled off to the olive press where they are crushed and all the juice is gathered. But
And it seems like
then
they lose their identity,
they
doesn't
lose
it?
identity. But then what happens? They go into the menorah and they're lit, and now they're converted to light, and light's eternal. Light, a beam of light goes on for eternity.
And people gather around those lights and
Yes.
they celebrate beautiful things
Right.
together.
And so who was really fulfilled? The one who saved his life or the one who gave his life?
I think we need to write that story.
Yeah.
Let's work on that.
Yeah, let's work on that. Maybe there's a writer out there who'd like to do that for us, an illustrator. But anyways, our time is gone. Well, that went quick.
My goodness.
So any final thoughts?
I'll let you do
All
that.
right. Well, I'm just thinking, you know, because of Adam and Eve's sin, they were driven out of the garden to the east, away from the tree of life, and cherubim were there to guard so they couldn't come back. But over time, God says, I'm going to go to them and bring the garden with me.
I love that.
Yeah. And that's what the tabernacle is, because in it, it had the Torah, which is a tree of life to those who grasp it.
And don't be discouraged when you see a pile of nuts and bolts when you open these portions initially and you think this is too complicated for me. Stick with it,
Yeah.
because what it builds and creates is so important.
That's right. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for listening. If you've stayed with us this far, congratulations. And,
fun.
It's been fun, and we'll be talking to you again next week.
Shalom.
Shalom and God bless.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.